Welcome to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Each week, we gather to discuss how being a follower of Jesus impacts our everyday lives. Whether you have been a believer for a long time or still have lots of questions about faith, we would love to have you join us as we embrace the joy of a transformed life. Welcome back to another week of Tuesday Talks. My name is Bridgett, and I'm so glad that you came to join us. Today, I am joined by my friend Sam Viau. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you, Bridgett.
And I'm so glad to have this conversation. Sam and I were friends in college, and as we were just joking about, I hated Sam when I first met him. I thought he was a mean old man. But now here we are 5 years later, and both rocking the pastor life. He lives in Florida with his wife. And it's just crushing all of his dreams, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. I guess that's one way to put it.
So today's conversation, last week for you, those of you who listened, we had our part one series on femininity was last week. And so this week is part two, and we're talking about masculinity. So for all of you men that listened to the episode last week, this is your reward. We get to talk about all the man things, and it's just going to be a great day for dudes. So as we kind of go into our conversation today, the reason I asked Sam to be on the podcast, I've been really specific this year of who I've invited to be in episodes and whose voice do I want to be having these conversations with us. And one of the really cool things that I've watched as a friend to Sam is the way that you have really come alive. And I just remember joking, like the first year or so that we met, I was like, Sam, like, it's okay. Like, Jesus is just going to make you cry and it's going to be okay. And you're like, no, I'm never going to do that. Like, I'm fine. And just like the softness that God's brought to your heart and like the fire that God's put in you has been a lot of your obedience and your surrender, but also just the love of God pursuing you. And so I really want to share that with our audience today.
Yeah, for sure.
So as we begin, my first question for you is, what does it mean to be a man? Our culture tells us a lot of what it means, but what does it mean if we look from a godly perspective, a biblical perspective? How would you define manhood?
Yeah. So when you asked me to be on this podcast and you told me what it was going to be about, I went to the pastors in my church and I straight up talked about what it looks like. And we kind of chatted about what the culture says it is and just how men as a whole have kind of failed these past two generations, and especially as Christians. But Christian manhood to me is first being completely kingdom-minded. Everything you do would point back to the kingdom, would be to, so for example, when we sit in meetings, when we have meetings with people who are leaving the church, who are leaving our church, or approaching it from the perspective that we're talking to them with the intentions of bringing them back to church, or we're talking to them with the intentions of like they're now released from this church and we're going to help them get to the next level because it is so much bigger than church attendance.
Yeah.
So little things like that, being kingdom minded, even for our families, like how do I in marriage approach situations kingdom minded? And then the second big thing, I've kind of two big things and then a bunch of words. But the second big thing is that us as men are the same people in public as we are in private. Mm-hmm. Are we the same person? Yeah, we are in the church, in work, with our family as we are when we are alone. Because that's huge. That is, and that goes to my words, which a spiritual man, a Christian man would have integrity. They would be able to admit when they are wrong. And take a position of humility after admitting that, which is, I mean, speaking for myself, super hard to do. So integrity, honesty, faithfulness. And that's how I would start it. We could break it down forever, but I would say that chunk would be what I would describe as a Christian man.
Yeah, that's good. And so on that list, you mentioned a lot of responses. So the integrity, the honor, the faithfulness, like those don't happen in religion. You can make yourself kind of go over some stuff, but that's something that really happens when you have a deep friendship with God. And so as we continue our conversation, how has learning what it means to be a son of God helped you to be a better man? And how has it helped you to pursue emotional health?
Well, I don't know if you've probably talked about the PSF retreat, but it's crazy how long we can go, or how long I went in my walk with Jesus before I, realized it was a two-person thing. It was a two-way street.
Yeah.
And it was very much, God, I need this. Please do this. If you do this. But until I experienced that freedom and that love for the first time, and I understood what it meant to, like, it's okay to be vulnerable with Jesus. It's okay to be emotional with Jesus. It's okay to have all those things. And for a while, I never even thought about those things. Mm-hmm. So I guess looking from the father-son perspective, it was difficult to consider myself the son at first because I didn't want to lose that power, I guess. Once I gave everything up, then I was like, I don't know how to put it. Like I wasn't willing to give everything up because I needed that control. Mm. So realizing that, I am a son and how a father-son relationship works and experiencing that freedom and that love for the first time, it completely changed my whole perspective on what my relationship with God was and how to approach that.
What was you talk about the love experience. What was that? Like, what did the Lord do that changed your heart?
Yeah. So on this retreat that I went on, it was a lot of him showing me that I have boxed up my heart for way too long. I've put concrete slabs around it, and it was okay to open the door. Mm. It was okay to let him in. Whenever I tell the story, I tell the story of Gideon. And God had called Gideon to do something, and he went and hid in his father's house from the people who were pursuing him. And the people showed up at his father's house, and Gideon's father took a stick and stood in that doorway. And he said, if you're going to get to Gideon, you have to go through me. And in that, I was in a little hut. Long story short, I was in a little hut, and I took a stick and I shoved it in the doorway. And I truly allowed God to, like,
be the dad.
He came into that room, into that hut, and we dealt with everything that I was pushing aside.
Cool.
We brought it up, we talked through it, and he forgave me. And I truly felt the Lord's love for the first time in my Christian walk. I felt that freedom. It was just me literally having to open the door and allow him to come in, and understanding that he was going to protect me from whatever I needed to be protected from.
Yeah. And you changed. So, you literally came back like a brand new person.
Oh yeah. Like it shifted my whole mindset. It was from that point on, I had experienced the things that I was telling people about. So for a long time, I was telling people about this thing they could have in Christ, but I hadn't experienced it. Mm-hmm. So now it had put a face to the thing I was describing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the freedom.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you think keeps men from having those moments with God? That's a really intimate experience, which is open to all of us. But I feel like men seem to struggle with that loving connection with God. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a combination of a bunch of things and totally different person to person, male to male. But for me, it was pride. And it was shame. And I feel like pride would be at the top of the list for most men, and even shame. Again, going back to what I said, I wasn't okay with not controlling everything. Mm-hmm. I needed to control this area. God could have this, but I'm gonna continue to do this. And even if people ask me about it, I'd be like, oh yeah, totally. But I was still 100% in control. It's hard. I'm a 6'5", 250-pound man, so people already see me as this big leader. So it's hard to be in a leadership position and not want to have full control of everything. So as far as shame, it's in my own life, there was things that I knew I had to repent for. Mm-hmm. And there was things I knew that, like, there were sins I was committing that I knew I was committing. But it felt like I was in so deep, and that no matter what happened, I could never come back from that. I would never be able to make a comeback from that. I would always be known as, like, God would always see me as this person that does this thing.
Yeah.
And I carried that. I carried that for a long time. And the picture I got on that retreat was in the hut, it was super muddy, and I was trudging through the mud, and I was pulling these big concrete slabs behind me, and I was literally holding the chains in my hand. Like, they weren't connected to me. They weren't attached to me in any way, but I was holding these slabs in my hand, and I was the one who refused to let go.
Wow.
So I was making it difficult for myself, where God had a path right next to me, off of the mud, without the slabs. And I was being so stubborn. So pride and shame in this one, that I would not let those things go, because I was too afraid of what the repercussions would be if I was forgiven for those, and who I would have to talk to, who I would have to say these things to, and how they would view me. So I carried that shame with these things for a long time. And it wasn't until I literally opened my hand and released those things that I even realized what I was missing.
That's really good. The thing with repentance and forgiveness, especially when there's other people involved, is we live in this fear of, well, what if I get right with God and then I go have the conversation with a person and it's terrible, or they hate me forever, or everybody and their brother knows my business about what happened and all that kind of stuff. And like, that's everybody. That's not just a man thing. That's a human thing.
Yeah.
And so coming to that place with, like, God, I've done everything that you've asked me to do. I've had the conversation you've asked me to have. I've got my heart right. But I'm not controlled by what other people say or think about my life.
Yeah.
And that's a really huge part. So you kind of talked about, like, your whole life was this, let's shove it in a closet. Let's not talk about it. Let's just, let's stay bound to pride. Let's stay bound to shame. And then Jesus came in his awesome wonderfulness.
Yeah.
So now from that point, because one of the questions people always ask me is like, well, how do you know that an encounter with God is actually an encounter with God and not just some, like, you're listening to worship music and it just feels fuzzy and it feels great.
Yeah.
And from the response I always give people is, you'll know it's a true encounter with God when it establishes freedom and when it maintains freedom.
Yeah, for sure.
So it brings freedom, yes, in that moment, but 5 years later, like, you're still walking in that freedom.
Yeah.
And so can you talk to that part of, like, what do you do now? Like, when that comes up and the Lord's like, hey, we got to talk about something, or you feel you're like, wow, like, I haven't actually felt anything in a while. What are the healthy steps that you're taking on a daily basis or a weekly basis to kind of check in with God so that your heart's not getting clogged up again?
Yeah, for sure. Well, just leaving that retreat again, it changed my whole perspective. So now, before it was just checking the boxes, which I'm sure people have heard, like, oh, I'm doing my devotional because I'm told to do a devotional. I'm reading my Bible. I'm praying because I'm told to do these things. But it's so much more than that now. I've experienced what the Lord has for me now. And I have felt that. I have felt that freedom. I have felt his love. And there is nothing that will stop me from chasing that. Like, there's nothing that would prevent me from pursuing this relationship after experiencing how real it is. Yeah. So now everyday life looks different than it did many years ago, but I still start with a devotional. I sit on that devotional. And
what does that look like? Can you tell us what that looks like for you?
Yeah. So, like, the devotional I'm doing right now.
Just like, how are you engaging with God now in a way that's not because you have to?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I recently went on a prayer retreat with one of my buddies, and that was another encounter I had that completely changed my perspective on prayer. Because even after the retreat, my prayer was still leaning towards I was kind of listing things. I was thankful, but I was still listing things. But on this retreat, I was receiving visions from God, and I was receiving different words from God. And I had never acted on those before. I had never trusted that was from the Lord. But, like, my prayers were right in line with what my buddy was praying. And these things were, like, coming to my head, and I was seeing them so clear. And normally I'm very quick to say, oh, that's just my head. But this time I totally leaned into it. And I just received what he was giving me. Cool. So prayer life now is, my prayer is to enter into God's presence. It is totally me receiving what the Lord has for me for this day. So what does the Lord have for me today? God, what do you want me to do today? Opposed to still super thankful, but I'm thankful, and here's how I want today to go.
Yeah.
Like, Lord, how can I be your hands and feet today? And I've recently, my buddy, in preparation for this prayer retreat, we started going through the Psalms, but I'm sure, like most men, Bible reading can sometimes get boring, and that's okay. It's okay to say that. So I needed to find a way for myself that was an intimate way to read the Bible, a way to experience the Bible than any other way I had before. So I've been going through the Psalms. I don't know if you want me to talk on the whole thing.
Go for it.
Okay. So my buddy Ethan, me and him started doing this thing. We're reading through the Psalms, but we read it 5 different times. So the first time I read the Psalm, I just read it straight, pray that God would speak to me through it, use those words, do what he's going to do. Second time through, I remember, I look who wrote the Psalm, most of the time David, and I try to picture what situation he was in when he was writing that Psalm, what he was experiencing, what trial he was dealing with. And then I can understand that David realized no matter what he was facing, that God was the answer. God was going to be what sustained him. God was going to get him through it. God was always the answer. Then the third time through, we read it, remembering that Israel prayed these. They prayed these prayers as a collective nation to enter into God's presence.
Yeah.
So picturing what that looked like as an entire, like as the city of Vero Beach, like us entering into God's presence through this Psalm, Israel entering into the presence through this Psalm. And then the fourth time through, I read it from the perspective of Jesus. Jesus prayed these Psalms, and they're about him, it's crazy. But he prayed these Psalms. So I read it from the perspective of Jesus praying these Psalms. And then the last time through, I do a third person type thing where I'll put I for myself, and I'll switch those out. And it's crazy how many times you could read something and not get anything from it, and then go back and read something and it's like completely different. So that's been really good for me these past couple months.
And I think the theme of what I'm hearing is so often, and this really makes me angry when people say this, but like, Lord, whatever your will is, like, it can happen. And yes and no, I feel like that can be really passive of like, I just don't want to have any responsibility. And I don't want to have to figure out what God's heart is. So I'm just going to like pray this like blanket prayer. And I think from what I've heard you say, like, for you to stay healthy and for you to continue to like grow in intimacy with God, like you had to make space for it.
Yeah, for sure.
Like it is an intentional, like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to spend time in God's word. I'm going to spend time away from, my family, my job, and I'm going to go on a retreat. Like I'm going to create space for that. And like how much God honors that. And not that we don't perform for God. But there is this expectation of like, you create space for what you honor. And so I just think that that's a huge part of it too, is that the way that we stay healthy is just like we would, make time to exercise or make time to, make healthy meals. Like we need to make sure we're doing that the same with the Lord.
Yeah, for sure.
So kind of moving directions a little bit, I want you to talk about healthy strength for men, and what does it mean to use your strength in a way that honors God and honors you and honors others?
Yeah. So I have a bunch of words. Well, not a bunch, but I have words for this. I think the first one is responsibility, but in the sense of owning up to stuff. Like you have your responsibilities. I think that is healthy strength, but owning up to stuff when you haven't been responsible, or when you've messed that up in some way, and being okay with it. I say toughness to go with strength, but not toughness in the sense of muscle toughness or head toughness, but being able to overcome. Yeah. Like being able to overcome things that are preventing you from taking that step. And yeah, that goes along with resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
I think those were my three big ones. And I could talk more on that. It's tough to be a strong male Christian. It is. And I mean, it's tough to be a strong female Christian, but I think what I've seen from entering into the pastoral role is just how much more that responsibility shifts than what I thought it was going to be, and what that toughness actually looks like when it's related to another person, and not just me overcoming something, but me overcoming something with another person or towards another person has been an interesting start to ministry.
Mm-hmm. What is the boundary line between saying, as God created me to be masculine and for me to have this strength, what is the line between owning that and owning sonship and just trying to win an argument or just trying to push people over because you want to be right?
Yeah, I think that's where pride comes in. That's the biggest, pride. Understanding that it's much bigger than myself and understanding that it's okay for me to be wrong. The problem is when we know we're wrong, it is super hard for a man to admit that he is wrong. Mm-hmm. So even with my wife, we can be having an argument and I could be so wrong, but my pride is so thick in that moment that I just need her to change her thinking so that I'm right.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing would go for confrontation in the church. I'm not a very confrontational person. I don't like it, but it needs to happen. That is that's a healthy leadership, healthy congregation. You need that. Healthy friendships, healthy everything. You need confrontation. So what I do, I'm just going to relate it to my wife. When we're in an argument, it is two people that think they're 100% right. So I will take a step back. I'll try to see it from her perspective, which is mostly impossible most times because I have no idea how you women think.
All over.
Oh yeah, but I'll understand that we both think we're super right. So, but I have to see it from her perspective. So in the church, I'm going to put in examples of the church now. If I was to bring something to the staff, I'm presenting something, maybe it's an event, and I have some pushback from someone who doesn't know the backside, but they're saying, this isn't going to work. This isn't right. What would my approach be? And I'd like to say that I would take a step back, pray through it. Lord, is this really what you want to happen? Mm-hmm. Is this how you want it to go? And then approach that person. But that's easier said than done. So yeah, when I think of confrontation and understanding sonship, it would go back to kingdom-minded and understanding that, we can pray through this together. We can get through this confrontation together. And I don't need to puff out my chest and try to fight someone for it.
Okay. So continuing on honor, one of the things we talked about last week in the Femininity podcast was, as women, like, what does it mean to honor men? And so from your perspective, what is healthy masculinity and how does that honor women?
I think first I'm going to say the first thing I would say about all the other stuff would be cherishing women as God's gift, as they are God's gift to us. And I was having a conversation with one of the pastors and we were talking about this and he said, it's crazy. Some men, I'm just going to talk about marriage for this part, but some men will go fishing and catch a big fish and they'll talk about this fish to all their friends, all their family. They'll tell everyone about this fish that they caught, but they've been married to this woman for 15 years and they go home and they don't say anything to her. They don't talk about her. Mm-hmm. So number one would be cherishing women as God's gift, for sure. The second would be understanding their role, respecting their role, and not the traditional, like, what people think their role is. Like, I totally consider myself the head of my household, but I also consider Emily the head of the household. Like, I come home and I wash dishes, I cook dinner, I do laundry, and she comes home late from work. She works later than me, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I consider us both in different ways, the head of our household, and understanding that role for women in the church, for women anywhere.
Yeah.
What God has for them is bigger than what I think, or what we think their role should be.
I think I think growing up with more of a religious upbringing, or like a religious church experience, I know one of the things that I felt robbed of is I didn't know how to have male friends.
Yeah.
And I think the Lord definitely healed that in college. I mean, you were just one of the many guys that God put around me, friends, pastors, leaders, counselors. Like God just really sort of like surrounded me with men that loved me and honored me. And like, that was so healing. And I could literally, like, I remember the times that like people would like be kind to me and I would feel my heart shut off inside of like, whoa, nope, not receiving this. Like, don't need your help, don't need you. And like, I would feel my heart shut off on the inside. And like the Holy Spirit, like we got to a point, he was like, you need to go apologize. Like that was not okay. Like, and literally what the Lord said to me, he's like, do you realize that you are sinning against like half of the entire world?
Yeah.
And I was like, that's rude. Like, yeah, you are being rude. Stop. And just like that healing journey, what that's happened. And I think that that's really cool. Not only in a marriage context, not only in a church context, but what does it mean for us to live as male and female? And I think one of the things I've been processing through, I've been reading through Genesis a lot. It's a lot of everything seems to be going back to Genesis. And I think when we read the creation account, we think that woman was created because Adam was lonely. And I really don't think I don't think that's true. This is like my interpretation of it. But I think what happened is Adam saw God in the fullness of who he was. Like he's like, God, I see you in your fullness. I see the rabbits and the giraffes and I see all of these things that you've made, but yet I've seen you in your fullness. And for some reason that doesn't match what I'm seeing on earth. Like what's missing? I believe that's when God breathed life into woman. And so like how much that changes the narrative and like how much that heals the war between masculinity and femininity when we realize that like, and like, I love what Adam says, like here, like bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh.
Yeah.
And so like what it is to mean that like Eve wasn't Adam's toy. He wasn't because she needed to fill some void in him. It was because there was more to God that he had yet to see. And he knew something was gone. And that goes the vice versa too for women of like, God, I see you in your fullness and I know who you are. And that if both male and female are created in your image, then I need to make sure I'm surrounded with healthy men, brothers, friends, counselors, pastors, whoever it is, that's so important.
Yeah.
This is a fire topic for me. Just because I feel like the church is so messed up because of this, because we have taught men and women, what does it mean to love one another and honor one another in a non-romantic context, because we need one another. And there was, I think it was either Father's Day or Mother's Day, Pastor Hona Toledo, something like that. He's from California. And one of the things that he said was, like, the reason we're so messed up, this is a paraphrase, was because we are missing fathers in households and mothers in churches. And so just as equally important, like, I would love for you to speak into that for a second. What are the female leaders that have been in your life, or just the female influences that have helped you grow in God because of that? Like professors or pastors or whoever that would be.
Yeah. Honestly, my household, my house growing up, my mom was the spiritual leader, and she continues to be the spiritual leader. So that's all I've known growing up. My dad, he's coming around 100%, but my mom was totally the person that got us to church, got us to youth group, has showed us what joy is, how to pursue the Lord, all these things. So growing up, I didn't even have the male leader. My mom was totally and I couldn't picture it any other way. And I think even doing that, me and my mom will have a conversation, and we will approach situations or pray through a situation so differently. Like there are gifts and things that women have that I will never, ever, ever possess or ever be able to think like or ever have, and vice versa. So it's crazy to like think that only men would lead certain things. Like there's just so much more. Like women have gifts and talents, and the Lord has blessed even you in ways that I will never, ever be able to think or do. So yeah, my mom was my biggest influencer, and I credit her to where I am. She's prayed for me since I was a young lad, and now I'm a pastor, and like she led me to that. It wasn't my dad. So yeah.
Yeah. So on the opposite side of that, how has finding healthy male influences, and again, like this is not degrading our families, but I know that people come, whatever it is, how has surrounding yourself with healthy male influences helped you as well grow? Like just as you have grown on this journey of what does it mean for me to be a man? How have other men played into that and called you into manhood?
Yeah. Well, definitely I had from college until now, there was a wide variety of men that I have been able to work under or learn under, and all great men, like teaching me how to be emotional, to how to treat my wife, to how to treat the congregation. So this is the first time in my life I'm not surrounded by friends, but I'm surrounded by like adults, male adults that I hang out with. And it has been completely different from anything else that I've done in my life. So as much as we say it, as I'm sure every man has heard it, the accountability and just the lessons to be the wise walk with the wise. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. Like you are a product of who you hang out with. You become who you hang out with, whether you believe that or not. So I am surrounded by good Christian pastors who are men. And I would like to think I'm becoming like them every day. And it has been a blessing. Because in college, there was a little chunk where I was surrounded by some crazy people, but hey, I don't think I became crazy. Maybe I did.
That's all right. It's good. So we're almost at the end of our time. Do you have anything else that you want to add? Anything else you want to say to the guys before we?
Yeah, totally. Guys, if you're listening, it is okay to be vulnerable. Is it okay? It is okay to cry. It's okay to be emotional. You do not have to be the rock for someone. You do not have to be that strong anchor for someone that is totally Jesus. That is not you. You do not need to be that. So cry. Go home and cry.
Amen.
But seriously, your relationship with Jesus is way more important than how someone views you. It is way more important than your pride. And I'm speaking from experience. The shame you are carrying, you do not need to carry that. That is not yours to carry. Jesus died for that shame, and you need to give it up. And you may need to talk to some people, as in people that you hurt through the process, but I'm telling you, God's got you. Be confident. Be a man of God.
What is one thing you wish that women knew about men?
One thing that I wish women knew about men. I think there's that our culture still thinks men are this strong, never crying thing. And that, like, even in relationships or in general, women can go to these guys and say, and kind of say this stuff, and the guys not feel anything. I think we feel that stuff. There is stuff we feel when we're talking, even if it's like, oh, he never feels that, or he never thinks like that. We do. Even if we don't admit it, we think like that.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bridgett.
How can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Hey, well, if you're ever in Florida, look me up, but I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram.
I'll tag you so people can.
Yeah, I don't know any of my handles.
That's all right.
If you want to shoot me an email, I'll have Bridgett put that in there too. I would love to chat. I'll even put my phone number.
Oh gosh, wow. We're going Bob Goff on us.
That's right. Hey, that's the devotional I do. I love Bobby G.
Oh, cool. Well, as we close, can you just pray for everybody listening? Whatever Jesus wants to say, will you just pray for our listeners as we close?
Yeah, for sure. Lord, I thank you for this podcast. I thank you for Bridgett, where you have her, Lord, how you have created her and who you have created her to be, Lord. I pray you would continue to use her to bless people, Lord. Continue to allow her to be your hands and feet every day. And Lord, I thank you for every person listening to this podcast, God, that you would bless them, Lord, that they would hear from you in a new way, God, that they would be blessed, that they would feel loved, Lord, that they would experience your freedom, God, maybe even for the first time. Teach us to seek you, Lord. Teach us to experience that freedom. We love you, Lord. Thank you that you made two genders and that we are so opposite, God, but that we work together or can work together so well. Lord, bless us. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a review, and be sure to subscribe, rate, and share. If you would like to join our conversation on social media, be sure to use the hashtag TuesdayTalksWithSAC. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.